everyone. Thank you for joining us for this MDA Engage webinar on nutrition and neuromuscular disease. Healthy eating is important to maintain a healthy weight, have good bone density, and prevent gastrointestinal issues like constipation and acid reflux. My name is Michelle Barrios, and I am the Community Education Specialist at MDA. We are thrilled to have you join us today for this important and educational webinar. The webinar today is part of our larger MDA Engage flagship community event series, which focuses on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and resources. Please be sure to visit the MDA Engage section on mda.org for updates on upcoming virtual events. We are recording today's event and will be posting it to the mda.org website for on-demand viewing to ensure that those who were not able to join us live today are able to access this information. Please know that all phone lines have been muted. We will be having a question and answer session towards the end of the webinar. Please be sure to utilize the Q&A window to type in your questions. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, a tray of webinar icons will appear. Click on the Q&A bubble to open the window and enter your question. You do not need to wait until the Q&A session to chat in your questions. As questions come up along the webinar, please feel free to send those in. Before we begin, I would like to say thank you to our speakers, whom you will meet shortly. For over 70 years, MDA has led the way in accelerating research, advancing care, and advocating for the support of our families. MDA's mission is to empower people living with muscular dystrophy, ALS, and related neuromuscular diseases to live stronger, more independent lives. Let's review the objectives for today's webinar. Attendees will learn why healthy eating is important, what foods to choose for a healthy diet, food modifications, and foods to stay away from. I would like to now introduce our speakers. Kristen Cherosky has been a clinical dietitian at Nationwide Children's Hospital for the past 7 years and working in the muscular dystrophy spinal muscular atrophy clinic for much of that time. Kristen has enjoyed building relationships and learning from the multidisciplinary team, patients, and families. Kristen has a particular passion for helping patients and families to make healthy diet and lifestyle choices to optimize their health. Evelyn is a graduate of The Ohio State University and a clinical dietitian within the muscular dystrophy, spinal muscular atrophy, and complex healthcare programs at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. She specializes in providing medical nutrition therapy to infants, children, and adults with complex neuromuscular conditions, amongst other rare medical diagnoses. She has a particular passion for enteral nutrition and guiding parents and their families through the journey of utilizing feeding tubes to improve quality of life. Within the MDA SMA clinic at Nationwide Children's Hospital, Kristen and Evelyn work as part of a multidisciplinary team to provide patients with a comprehensive and whole health approach to their care. They and their team stay active within the MDA SMA community and assist patients locally, nationally, and internationally. And with that, I will share their presentation. And Evelyn, we're now on the title slide.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. My name is Evelyn, and I'm here with my counterpart, Kristen Cherosky. And as mentioned, we are registered dietitians in the muscular dystrophy and spinal muscular atrophy programs here in beautiful, sunny, tropical Columbus, Ohio. I just wanted to thank everybody for allowing us the opportunity to come speak with you all. We're extremely excited to be touching on the importance of nutrition in individuals with neuromuscular conditions. So a brief overview on the next slide. We are just kind of what to expect from us for the next hour. We're going to go over what is the role of the dietitian and what part does the dietitian play in the whole health approach to care in individuals with neuromuscular conditions, and how is focusing on one's nutritional status, how can that be beneficial in many different aspects of overall health? So why does nutrition really matter? Then we're going to switch gears a little bit and discuss building a healthy meal and some of the ways in which we educate and empower our families here at Children's to follow a healthy diet, and then discuss some of the common barriers to healthy eating that we encounter pretty frequently in our practice and ways in which we can navigate these to be successful. And then at the end, we are going to put everything together. We have some really helpful tips, tricks, recipes, and resources for you all to utilize at home. So on our next slide, I just wanted to start off by showing the way in which we operate here at Nationwide Children's within the care of a neuromuscular patient, because we follow a multidisciplinary care model. And essentially what that means is we're bringing together disciplines from all across the hospital, including our physicians, our occupational therapists, our physical therapists, our social workers, and then allowing the patient and the caregiver to be the key drivers of the care team and essentially optimizing the health status of our neuromuscular conditions. And, you know, as an academic medical center, we're focused primarily on patient care and, again, making sure that the patient and their family are the key drivers of their care. But we also are involved in research, further education, patient advocacy, and providing outstanding service, of course. So on our next slide, we want to talk about the role of the dietitian and how the actual role of a clinical dietitian might be a little different than the stereotypical view of what a dietitian does. So we're not the food police, right? We're not sitting in patients' rooms scolding them for not eating their fruits and vegetables. We have a really different focus as far as our practice and empowering our patients. So some of the things that we do when we are in a room with our patients is that we conduct a nutrition-focused assessment. And through that assessment, that allows us to identify some potential areas of concern that are nutrition-related and allows us to provide some education and recommendations based on those. We also play a role in managing dietary supplementation, so like those oral nutritional drinks like Ensure, Pediasure. And then we also have a considerably involved role within managing tube feedings or enteral nutrition and texture-modified diets. We also dabble a little in vitamin and mineral supplementation and recommending these things or educating families when they have questions about these. And then moreover than anything, the most crucial role of a dietitian within this patient population is just being a support system and providing resources when necessary. You know, diet in this patient population is probably one of the only things that patients and their families feel like they can control. So it behooves us to be more of a support system rather than being that stick in the mud to help empower them and to, you know, meet their goals, wants, needs, all of those kind of things. So on the next slide, why does nutrition matter? Why does nutrition or nutrition intervention matter, and what impact does paying close attention to one's nutritional status have on an individual with a neuromuscular condition? Well, kind of the obvious is that if we're paying attention to our nutrition, we're avoiding any imbalances in some of our micro and macronutrients that are needed to survive. That's pretty obvious, but also I kind of loop hydration into that as well, and making sure we don't have any imbalances in hydration so we aren't promoting any associated secondary complications with things like dehydration. And then making sure we are balanced as far as how much energy are we taking in versus how much energy does our body actually need, which can prevent any undesired weight loss or weight gain. With some of these things above, we can see some secondary negative impacts on some of the other organ systems within our body, and so paying close attention to nutrition can help prevent or reduce the impacts of that, like our gastrointestinal system, our pulmonary system, skeletal muscle, our heart, all of those things are very closely related to our nutritional status and what we are putting in our body. And then, particularly to this patient population, there are a lot of nutrition interventions that we can make to address some of the common complications that we have and that we often see with the neuromuscular diseases. So like difficulty swallowing, low bone density, some of the GI issues that we commonly see can be treated or, you know, reduced as far as the severity goes by paying close attention to nutrition. So on our next slide, I wanted to dive more into our nutrition-focused assessment, and essentially what exactly are we doing and what are we looking for when we're meeting with our patients and their families. So on the next slide, I wanted to start by talking about that nutrition assessment, and really that time is time that we are utilizing to collect data on our patients, right? We want to see what's their weight doing, what's their height look like, and how can we compare those? What do those look like as far as proportionality or our BMI? And then if the patient is under the age of 20, we'll plot those on a growth chart, and we can check out the percentiles and see how they compare with other kids their age. We also might do a little bit of math, do a little number crunching, and see what does the patient need as far as their energy, protein, fluids, micronutrients, and how can we make a little bit of changes there to better meet those needs. We might also talk about a diet history, which is a conversation where we are talking about what kind of things are making common appearances within your diet, or what kind of foods are you eating on a regular basis. And then also we're talking about activity levels. So how much are you moving? How much are you getting around? And how has that changed since the last time we saw you? And that may kind of circle back to the energy needs, and you know, if we're not moving as much, we may not need as much energy. And then, you know, we collect all this data, and then we need to interpret the data. So we are identifying some potential nutrition-related concerns that might have arisen, and what we can do to intervene there. So some things like self-feeding issues. Maybe the patient's complaining. They're saying, hey, it's getting really tough for me to feed myself, and I have to ask my parents to do that for me pretty often. Or maybe they're saying, I'm getting really choked up when I'm swallowing, and it's hard for me to chew meats or whatever. Maybe they're having new onset of some GI symptoms they've never had before. Or maybe we as dietitians, we might look at the growth chart and say, oh my gosh, we've had a really significant change in weight from last visit. What can we do? Or maybe we need to have a discussion about that and see what's going on. So I mentioned growth on the next slide. I mentioned growth charts, and I did want to mention these and point these out specifically because I do feel like these are points of discussion within the neuromuscular population, because there are no disease-specific growth charts for nearly any of our neuromuscular conditions, right? So our muscular dystrophies or spinal muscular atrophy, we don't have special growth charts to help us understand what we can expect from growth with these conditions in mind. Unfortunately, we have to rely on, for any patient 2 and under, we have to rely on the WHO or the World Health Organization growth charts, and any patient 2 years to 20 years, we have to rely on the CDC growth charts, both of which are assuming that we are assessing a typical child without growth-altering medical conditions. And so you can see where that might pose an issue if we're working with a patient that does have, obviously, a growth-altering medical condition. But nevertheless, this takes a bit of clinical expertise and subjective interpretation to see what is going on with each individual patient right now, and how is that translating to the data that we're seeing on these growth charts. And having that discussion with patients and families, I feel like sometimes can make them feel a lot better about what they're seeing, because each of these growth charts, especially the body mass index growth charts, have percentiles. And those percentiles, again, are showing us how does the patient compare to other kids their age. So we have our obese, overweight, healthy weight, and underweight categories there, differentiated by the colors on the graph. And anywhere we kind of fall in there is what we can categorize our weight or you know, proportionality, if you will. So On the next slide, essentially we're identifying while we're interpreting all of this data some nutrition-related challenges. Some may be weight-related, as I mentioned, some not. But on the next slide, I wanted to start off with some of the challenges that are related to weight, because I feel like these are the most common that we're seeing within this population. So the first of which being overnutrition, or those two top parts of the growth chart, the overweight and obesity categories. There are a lot of nutrition considerations that we need to be cognizant of when we have a patient with a BMI that falls within these categories. So on the left, you can see there's a good list, first of which being just our decreased calorie needs. Maybe this patient is not moving as much as they used to, and maybe they're taking in more from an energy perspective than they are expending, and so we can see either weight gain or progressing elevated weight status if our patient's taking in too much than their body needs. We know well about steroids and the effects that steroids have on our appetite, and how we can unintentionally eat a lot more than maybe our body needs just because we have that insatiable appetite. But the list of potential complications is a bit long for these weight categories, and so it's the primary reason why early nutrition intervention is pretty crucial when we're noticing this. So, for example, insulin resistance or an increased risk of diabetes can occur when the body becomes desensitized to that increased amount of carbohydrates or fats that we're taking in our diet. Dyslipidemia can occur, and that's just really a fancy word for saying abnormal levels of cholesterol and fat within our blood. High blood pressure, increased work of breathing, when we have all of that physical weight that's weighing down on our chest, especially when we're sleeping, which can cause that sleep apnea or difficulty breathing while we're sleeping. It also can be really tough for caregivers. The higher a patient's weight becomes, the more difficult and unsafe it becomes for the caregiver to do those activities of daily living, like transferring the patient, bathing them. All of those things become not only difficult, but again, could potentially pose a safety risk. Can also cause decreased functionality. I always, this is a point that I really press home with our patients, that, I never want their weight to become a hindrance to their functionality when we're up against a neuromuscular condition that is unfortunately already going to be doing that. So anything that we can do to help ourselves, the better, because, all in all, this can have a really big psychological impact and create a poor quality of life for the patient. So on the next slide, I want to go into the kind of the contrasting side, right, the opposite situation with our underweight status. So if our energy intake is less than what our body is expending, and maybe we're not moving around as much, but maybe our energy our energy requirements are increasing because the body is working harder to meet our needs as we start to eat less and less. It's working harder to perform some of our normal bodily functions, like keeping our heart beating and our lungs breathing. The body at that time, if we're not taking in enough nutrition orally, our body is looking for sources of energy to combat that. So it doesn't discriminate. It starts looking at our fat, but then it starts also looking at our muscle mass as areas of potential energy, and that process in and of itself requires energy. So as you can see, the less we're eating, the higher and higher our energy requirements are going to be. We can also see some increased difficulty chewing and swallowing if our body is kind of breaking down its own muscle mass. Our jaw and our GI tract and our esophagus are all based muscles, and if we're losing our muscle mass, it's going to be a lot harder for us to chew, swallow safely. Again, kind of along with the functionality piece of it, maybe the patient just doesn't have the energy or the ability to feed themselves the way they were if they're not taking in enough. And so it can prolong meal times. They can require others to feed them. It can also cause some further GI issues more than just chewing and swallowing. So constipation, delayed gastric emptying, or the stomach is not necessarily emptying out the food after they've eaten it into the small intestine, which can precipitate into further issues as well. I touched on some of the potential complications here, but essentially we don't want to do anything that would exacerbate any further muscle breakdown. So we want to make sure we're nourishing our body to maintain the muscle mass for as long as possible. We don't want to further any weight loss if we're struggling with a low weight status. The last thing we want to do is promote weight loss, further weight loss, as energy intake is low and our needs are getting higher and higher. And of course, that's just, again, having a negative impact on the patient's quality of life. On the next slide, I also wanted to talk about some non-weight related complications that are nutrition related we often see in our practice. The first of which, I put constipation first because, to be honest, I really do feel like I talk about poop at least 40 times a day. I'm constantly asking my patients, hey, how are you pooping? Are you pooping every day? Are you having normal bowel movements? Do you suffer from constipation? Do you utilize any bowel medications to help you go to the bathroom? Because these are, not only are these nutrition-related complications, but they're complications at baseline. A lot of our patients just struggle with these, with the implications of their musculature. And these are things that we can help them out with, and we can make things easier on them if we get early nutrition intervention. I mentioned difficulty swallowing, or what we call dysphagia. Again, very common with a lot of our patients, not necessarily because of their nutrition, but can be exacerbated by a poor nutritional status. Heartburn, acid reflux is another really big one for kind of the same reasons, and I mentioned delayed gastric emptying earlier. Potential complications of this are multifaceted. Our patients can feel generalized discomfort, full, bloated. They don't really feel like sitting down and eating a big, well-rounded meal or drinking a lot of water. And so we start to see some poor food and fluid intakes there. Dysphagia, I mentioned, if you're having difficulty swallowing, the last thing we want is for things to start going down the wrong way and putting you at risk for respiratory infection. And we don't want increased respiratory infections to lead to increased hospitalizations, especially around this time. So doing all we can to intervene early, again, can really help improve the quality of life of our patients. And then lastly, for nutrition considerations on the next slide, bone health is something that we touch on a lot in our clinic. The use of corticosteroids is huge because it promotes bone loss and promotes osteoporosis, or that progressing of low bone mass. And we know that our patients, this is not necessarily a negotiable thing for them, so we need to do all we can to get ahead of it as quickly as possible. Our bones are very dependent upon our muscles to help maintain their strength, as our muscles kind of anchor them in place. And if our muscles are getting weak or breaking down, we are at an increased risk of fractures. And so just making sure that our bones are strong so that we decrease that risk of fracture, even just a little bit. And then we also want to really talk to our patients and make sure they're taking in enough vitamin D or calcium, and determine whether or not that they need a supplement in addition to what they're taking in their diet. Complications, I mentioned a few of these, but I did want to point out scoliosis, because scoliosis has been reported in up to 90% of our guys with DMD or Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And of those, it's estimated that up to 25% of these men will experience a long bone fracture with subsequent loss of their ambulation. So as they're reducing their weight-bearing activity progressively over time, we notice the bones start to decrease further and further with regard to their bone mass or bone density. So on the next slide, we talked about all of these challenges, but what are we doing about them? What are the dietitians doing to help with all of these things? So on the first slide here, dietary education, I wanted to start kind of on a surface level of some of the things that we're doing all the time for almost every patient, and then get into some of the areas where we may have more of a complex and frequent involvement with our patients. So dietary education, we provide this to almost all of our patients. We are constantly talking about ways in which we can better the diet, and potentially talking about some dietary plans, or some of those, like you may hear, like DASH diet, or the Mediterranean diet, or maybe our patient has constipation and we say, okay, we want you to follow a high fiber, high fluid diet to try to help move things along in your GI tract. Or maybe our patient is struggling with an elevated weight status. Maybe we can try to control their calories a little bit and find areas where we can cut out some calories without that aren't providing much nutritional value. We might also talk about areas where we can add in food. or avoid particular foods to help relieve some of these issues, right? So let's say they're suffering from the dyslipidemia that we talked about, or the elevated fat in their blood. We might say, hey, it looks like your diet's pretty high in saturated fats, and these are the foods that include them. Can you focus more on the foods that are high in unsaturated fats and they're easier for our body to break down, so they're not floating around in our blood? Or let's say, for example, we notice that, hey, they got a bone density scan and their bones are pretty brittle. Let's talk about how we can increase the calcium within the diet. And then lastly, part of the education is addressing fad diets. I feel like this is a newer thing within the last 20, 30 years of patients coming in and asking, hey, I saw this on the internet, hey, I saw this on TikTok or whatever, and I want to try it. Is this appropriate for me? And discussing with each individual patient, is this good for you? Maybe it's good for the next room over, but maybe not for you. And essentially, again, doing this for virtually all of our patients and families. So next I talk a lot about vitamin and mineral supplementation, and this goes a lot with the fad diets, right? There are already a ton of vitamin and mineral supplementations on the market. It is almost too overwhelming to walk down the supplement aisle at the grocery store now because there's just so many different choices and so many different brands. But the problem is that many of these come with very limited clinical research. So there's not a lot of evidence supporting a large majority of some of these supplements that you'll find out there. That's not to say that all of them are not good and that some of them do not have a place in some of our patients' kind of medical plan. But I will say we're pretty limited as far as what we do recommend. So the biggest one that we do recommend is an age-appropriate multivitamin. It helps fill in the gaps of the diet and kind of meet some needs that maybe our diet is not meeting. So for our kids, I usually recommend our chewables or the tablets or even the liquids, and then if our patients can swallow pills, we usually will do like the capsules. But we always try to encourage our families to avoid any gummy multivitamins because they don't contain any minerals. That was something new I learned by joining this clinic. But any of the gummy vitamins contain no minerals, so you're not going to find any iron or calcium or anything like that in gummy multivitamins. So we want to make sure they're getting a good, well-rounded multivitamin. There are some other additional supplements that have great clinical evidence behind them. CoQ10 is a huge one used particularly in this patient population to address the fatty acid pathway. And then iron too, if we're noticing some iron deficiency anemia, vitamin D and calcium, again for the bones. And then on the next slide here, we talk about calorie and protein supplementation. So that's another kind of dietary education piece that we're doing. And this is really geared towards patients that we want to promote healthy and controlled weight gain. I would say this high calorie, high protein diet is probably the most common that we're educating on because, again, we are going back and forth with regard to weight pretty often in this patient population. So the way in which we recommend doing that is usually through our fun little coin phrase, our attables and our spreadables. And these are foods that we can add or ingredients that we can add to what we already eat to increase the calories and protein of the meal without necessarily adding a ton of extra volume, right? So if you're sitting down and having a plain piece of toast, we might recommend putting some peanut butter on that toast versus telling you to have 2 pieces of toast, or something like that. It's going to be a little bit more manageable for the patient. This is also an area where we might recommend some oral nutritional supplements. So those would be things like your Ensures, your Pediasures, Boost, all of those things. And figuring out how much of each one, how many calories, all of those things, what's going to be the most appropriate and tolerated by our patients. And then figure out where can we incorporate these things to help out. So generally, my personal recommendation is to try to fit them in between meals if we can to help do what, essentially as their name implies, supplement our diet and not become something that we're relying upon for meals. But we also might recommend calorie and protein fortifiers. So these are medical products that are made to augment the calories and protein of a food simply by just mixing them into whatever food you're eating. These are kind of a last-ditch effort if we've tried a lot of things, or maybe we have a picky eater and we really need to get some more calories in, but we're limited as far as the ingredients or volumes that we're able to take. Along the same lines, we start to get involved with texture-modified diets as well. especially with some of our older patients. These are essentially what a texture modified diet is a mechanically altered diet where we're changing the consistency of our foods or fluids to help promote safe swallowing and prevent that aspiration or food or fluid going down into the lungs and promoting infection. With these diets, we work really closely with some of our feeding therapists here. So those are speech language pathologists or occupational therapists by trade. And they are super helpful in telling us, looking at the patient, having them eat or drink a few different consistency things and telling us, what looks best and what seems to be what they're going to tolerate the best. And we may also have them go as far as to do what we call a video swallow study. And that's where we can watch a patient eat several different types of consistencies and textures of food under imaging to see if the food itself is going down the wrong way or the right way. So as you can see, we have several different types of food modifications. We can have our chop diets, where that's essentially where we're just cutting everything up really small and just making sure there's no big pieces of meat or things that could potentially get caught in the throat. And this would be something similar to like a diet that you would provide for a toddler. And then we have our mashed and softer solids. So that would be like if you did steamed carrots that are fork mashed or something like that. There can still be some larger clumps, but we want for everything to mostly be softer. And then we have our pureed diets, which that's completely smooth. There are no lumps or chunks there, and that is I would say the furthest extent as far as our textured modified diets go. We have different fluid consistencies as well, going down slightly thick to pudding thick, depending on what the patient needs. And then kind of kicking it over to the most, I would say, complex and frequent intervention that we have on the next slide is enteral nutrition. And I think this goes hand in hand with our textured modified diets, because we're working alongside our patients and their families as well as the care team to try to help find the best possible and safest way in which we can get nutrition into our patients and make sure that they're meeting all of their needs, especially if they have a textured modified diet that's a little difficult for them to manage. Again, I like to promote this as an early and ongoing discussion with our families if the patient, again, is experiencing some of those challenges that we mentioned earlier, so some of the unintentional weight loss, difficulty chewing and swallowing, difficulty with self-feeding, all of those things would be indications for us to start talking about other ways of nutrition that might help them meet their goals. It could also be a discussion of, hey, maybe we don't want to switch over 100% to tube feeding, but maybe we just want to do some supplemental tube feeds at night. Maybe we want to add a little extra formula overnight, and then during the day you're free to eat and do whatever you please, but at night we know we're getting a little extra to maintain our weight and prevent any sort of nutrient deficiencies or dehydration. The benefits of this are endless, in my opinion. I work really closely with a lot of tube-fed patients, and I've seen a world of difference after we've placed these, and patients can utilize them as a tool, not only for nutrition, but for medication compliance too, because they can be utilized as a tool for medication administration. It also often can help improve some of the GI issues that we see, right? So some of the constipation, we can get in some of those bowel medications and get them in a little bit more consistently. We can do more fluid, especially if we're struggling with diarrhea and we need to make sure that we're staying hydrated if we're ill or something like that. Of course, we're going to improve our weight status if we're providing formula in addition to our oral intakes as well. So on the next slide, I just wanted to briefly show what these look like, because I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about them, but to be honest with you, they are probably the least techy pieces of equipment in the world. It is literally just this small tube, kind of looks like a straw there, you can see on the bottom left picture. Just looks like a little straw with a balloon on the end, and it just hangs out in the stomach, and we can utilize it to put things in. That'll go, again, directly into the stomach and bypassing the esophagus and mouth. And then kind of on the right, I also wanted to show what the small bowel feeding tubes look like. They're also pretty not techy in the sense that it's the same general concept, except past the balloon, we have a little shunt that goes off past the stomach and down into the very first part of the small intestine called the jejunum. And that's where our feeds or whatever medications that we utilize are primarily going to go. We utilize these small bowel tubes in patients that are at a higher risk of aspiration, or maybe they require some sort of respiratory support overnight, like BiPAP, or if they are chronically on mechanical ventilation or have like a vent. We might recommend these just to make sure that nothing comes back up and poses a risk of infection there. Or some of our patients that suffer from chronic vomiting, gagging, retching, all of those kind of things. And then kind of next slide, what do we do when we want to follow up on all of these things, and how often do we follow up on them? So again, as I mentioned earlier, our main goal is to empower our patients and families to understand and take part of their nutrition. So we want them to feel empowered, like they can do this on their own, but we want to check in early and we want to check in often. So with most of our patients, we are seeing them every 6 months to every year. But for some of our more complex patients, we might see them sooner if needed. But we want to see them at least every year so we can check their labs, we can do that nutrition assessment, and just make sure that they're doing okay and we haven't seen any significant changes in their weight, and just make sure we're touching base with the family, with the entire multidisciplinary team, to make sure that we are meeting all of their needs to the best of our ability. So next, we are going to switch gears a little bit, but because I wanted to make sure that we talked about some of the food-related things and what we can do if we are working on a healthy diet, because a healthy diet is a foundation of what we most discuss with our patients. So, you know, we want to promote our patients and caregivers to get involved with bettering their own health and taking a whole family approach. So this is a really great way to get them involved. And I'm going to turn it over to Kristen for that part.
Awesome. Michelle, can everyone hear me, just to be clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. So not sure how familiar everyone is with the image on the screen, components of a healthy meal, but this is from the USDA and serves as the nutrition recommendation based on the dietary guidelines. So we like to encourage our patients and families to model this when building a meal. So as you can see in the image, we have a half plate fruits and vegetables, a quarter plate of protein, and another quarter of your plate is grains. And then there's like the little dairy aside. So in the next few slides, we're just going to take a little bit of a look into each category. And then following that, we're going to kind of try to go through brainstorming any challenges that people see and how we can best address those challenges. So next slide, please, which is protein. So protein is so important for our body's general function and maintaining and building tissues. Best sources of protein, which a lot of us are probably familiar with, are meat, poultry, fish, dairy, so milk, yogurt, cheese, beans and legumes, nuts, eggs, and soy products as well. The general guidelines for protein are on the right-hand side of the screen, but we as dietitians do and can individualize these numbers as well. So those are kind of our general guideline, and then, you know, obviously when we're doing our assessments, as Evelyn mentioned, we're always tweaking those numbers based on each individual and their functionality. One of the most important roles of protein is its role in promoting satiety, or that fullness factor, which is why we, and especially in our role, we really recommend including it with meals and snacks to really help keep people full. On to our next slide, we have fat. So that was the next macronutrient we wanted to highlight. Fat is important for our bodies. It's not the enemy. So fat isn't bad. It's very important for energy, helps insulate our bodies, protect our organs. So the most important thing when we're thinking about fat is just being mindful of the type of fat that we're choosing. So as you can kind of see, there's different fats listed. So saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and trans fats. So what we kind of talk about with our families is being mindful of the saturated fats. So because, again, those are typically more prevalent in causing any heart issues, so that's as you can see, beef, pork, lamb, and a lot of times too, you know, saturated fat in the American population is usually also really prominent in like fast food or pizzas and stuff like that. So we kind of want to really be mindful of those. The other thing that we really want to avoid is trans fats. So that's margarine, shortening, convenience foods, prepackaged foods. So those are things that we really, really want to avoid. Things that we want to choose most are our unsaturated fats. So that is the monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats. And when we think about those, we're kind of thinking a little bit about, sometimes it can be really prevalent in Mediterranean lifestyles, but that's our olive oil, avocado oil, nuts, seeds, nut butters, avocado. So those are fats that we want to have more often in our diet. On to the next slide. So this just kind of highlights what a serving of fat is, just as a reference for families. So a serving of fat is around 45 calories or 5 grams of fat, and it kind of tells, you know, a teaspoon of butter or mayonnaise or a tablespoon of salad dressing or like some nuts, 16 pistachios, 10 peanuts. So just as those references. So again, we want to choose mostly lean meats, fish, poultry, kind of doing our Greek yogurt, hummus, guacamole in place of like mayonnaise more often, limiting those saturated and trans fats. When we're preparing things, thinking about kind of trimming the visible fat from the meat, baking, broiling, or grilling options are good choices versus frying. And then when we're preparing dishes, trying to do more like spices or lemon juice, or instead of those heavier cream sauces. Those are kind of ways that we can make those healthier choices. So on to the next slide, we're moving on to a favorite category for the dietitians usually, so our veggies and fruits. So our goal is to kind of get between 1 and 3 cups a day, and that is really kind of dependent on age as well. But fruits and veggies are so, so important for so many reasons. A big reason, especially in our population, as Evelyn mentioned, is the fiber source. So they really help with preventing or at least minimizing constipation along with the fluid. Critical in vitamins and minerals. They help us to maintain a healthy weight. They help with our heart health, so lowering cholesterol and blood pressure. And in that slide, I also kind of listed different types of vegetables. So the other thing we really like to encourage families to do is to branch out and try different things. So kind of just ways of trying new things, you know, getting kids or, you know, more involved in the cooking process, and we'll go over that a little bit later. But the more variety, the better regarding the vitamin and mineral content that is contributing to the person, and then also, you know, promoting immunity, but encouraging and trying different things and preparing them in different ways is something that we really like to highlight. So, you know, just an example for like vegetables, you know, you could put them in a salad, a soup, a stir fry. So it doesn't always just have to be a side of broccoli or like a side of, you know, I don't know, zucchini or something. You know, really mixing it up and changing it up can really help to encourage people to try something different. And then onto the fruits. So similar with the vegetables as far as, you know, like our function, and a lot of fruits also have a lot of antioxidants. So variety of fruits, we often encourage, you know, just snacking on fruits and vegetables, putting them into smoothies. You can even put them into like savory dishes. But this is fruits and vegetables are a key way for our families to get healthy and on those lower calorie foods into our diet. Something that I think is kind of interesting is almost with our families doing like a plant points challenge. So how many plant points can you get in one meal? So a plant point would be any plant, and that would be different ones. So if you're doing like dinner with, you know, a stir fry that has zucchini, broccoli, snap peas, you know, and then we can add in a little fruit salad with, you know, apple, pineapple, strawberries. So how many plant points can we get? And that's also kind of a fun way to involve kids as well. On to our next slide, so our grains. So very important for providing energy, sparing the use of protein for energy. Wheat, rice, oats, we're probably pretty familiar with all of these. How much is enough? So again, this is variable, but on average, 6 to 8 ounce equivalents per day. A serving, so what would an ounce be? Would be like a slice of bread, a half a cup of oatmeal. We really like to encourage half of our grains to be whole. That provides more vitamins and minerals and more fiber. Typically, this is a category that most patients and families don't struggle to get in as much. I think most kids especially enjoy this portion the most. So I think this is a good opportunity for just introducing different things. Maybe instead of white rice, doing brown rice, or trying quinoa, or different types of noodles, or stuff like that. Next slide is our snack. So that was the other component of the healthy meal that we really wanted to highlight, is snacks. So that's for providing energy between meals and curbing appetite between meals. So what we like to say is making a balanced snack is doing a source of protein and a source of fiber, because that's going to keep us full until our next meal. We don't really like, I kind of call them naked snacks. So like that would be something that's just like a piece of toast without anything on it. We digest that pretty quick. We're not really going to get full from it. It's not doing too much for us. So versus if you could add, as Evelyn mentioned before, some peanut butter to that, or some like mashed avocado, or apple and peanut butter, yogurt and berries, veggies and hummus. Those are going to really help to keep us full until that next meal. So on to our next portion. So we have a little slide that talks about barriers to healthy eating. And if, Michelle, if you're able to poll some of our audience about what of these barriers you guys would like to dive a little bit deeper into to learn more about. So the common things that we see in our space are time, so having trouble, finding time to make healthy choices or healthy meals, the cost of food, social norms, picky eating, if you're in a cooking funk, mealtime setting, and then fullness cues. So those are the things that we see most prominently in our clinic space. So if there's an opportunity for us to, the audience to give some feedback on the top 3 choices that we would like to go into a little bit deeper dive into, that would be great.
Yep, I've already opened up the poll and it is running. We'll give it about 40 more seconds so that people could vote. And we'll talk about the top 3, am I right?
Yes,
okay.
Correct.
We'll give it about 15 more seconds. Okay, I will be ending the poll now. Okay, it looks like our top 3, and I'll quickly just share the results here so everyone can see who's on live, is the number 1 was cost, number 2 was time, and number 3 was cooking funk.
Okay, perfect. So, Michelle, if you wouldn't mind doing, I guess in that order, we can do cost first. So, creating a plan, so cost, so the challenges.
Okay,
so
go to that slide. Do you know what slide it is specifically?
35. I have 36.
Cost, okay, found it.
And then it says challenges.
There it is.
Okay, perfect. So challenges for cost. So every time you go to the store, the healthy options always seem more expensive. Sometimes you go home with a large grocery bill and realize you barely have enough food to make a few meals for the week. So our next slide, so creating a plan for cost. So food prep and meal planning, I think, are something that can really help with this. So create a shopping list and stick to it. Our tips and tricks for that are a few things. Scoping out the grocery stores for sales for the upcoming week. So kind of in a backwards fashion, instead of saying, I want to make this week, go to like your local ads and see what's on sale and how can we incorporate that into our meal. That way we can kind of take advantage and get the kind of most bang for our buck. So there's lots of phone apps for coupons and discounts, but I think membership discount stores can also be helpful. So I don't know how many people belong to like Sam's Club or Costco, but buying in bulk can be really, really helpful for that as well. Eating seasonally, so local farmers markets often have great deals on produce. And the MyPlate, USDA's MyPlate, they have a website, and I think we have the resource shared, but they have an app that you can actually download and put in your zip code, and then once you do that, it'll show you all of your local farmers markets, which is awesome. And if you click on it, it'll give you more information, so you can try those out. The seasonal food guides and seasonal produce guides, so that goes along with the farmers markets. Trying to eat in season. So right now we're kind of spring turning to summer. Summer I think is the most robust time at the farmers market. So a lot of time berries, they have a variety of berries that are cheaper, zucchinis. In the fall, like the squashes are really affordable. I know that personally at my local farmers market, if you get a butternut squash at the grocery store, it's usually like probably at least $1 to $2 per pound. And if you guys know what those look like, they can be pretty hefty. Or a spaghetti squash, those can come out to like $12 when you check out. At my local farmers market, I can get one for like $1 or $2. So those are just easy little tips and tricks. The next slide regarding cost, again, is just kind of highlighting the weekly ads. So I just kind of put a few pictures in there, but I think that can really be probably one of the most helpful things when you're doing your research, raw or frozen. So for fruits and veggies, sometimes frozen, you get more bang for your buck. And honestly, it can be really nice to add those in there because they're always available. They're not going to go bad. So if you notice one week that, you know, frozen broccoli is on sale, maybe you get a few packs of that, and then you have it to maybe add to like your stir fry or add to like a pasta dish, or, you know, raw is great, but frozen is just as healthy and can be just as helpful for a lot of families. And the other picture that's on that slide is that the app. So it's called Shop Simple with MyPlate. And when you go to that, it'll show you ways to save, farmers markets, like different budget finds, which I think is really cool. So yeah, that's kind of our plan, I guess, for our cost challenge. Our next one, if you want to go to next time, Michelle, if you're able to see that one. 33, 34-ish.
Yep, we're there. Okay,
perfect. So our challenge, so every morning you're in a hurry to get everyone organized and out the door. In the evening, you're running errands, taking kids for extracurriculars, right, helping with homework, lots of stuff going on. Everyone's super busy. So creating a plan, our next slide, so for time. So options here, food prep, so being prepared for the week ahead. On the weekend or before you go shopping, having an idea of what you're making for that week. I think that can really be helpful. And then if your kids are old enough, even getting them involved in helping. So if they're able to like chop up some veggies or help put some stuff in some containers, pre-making little things for lunch can be really helpful. Pick one day and spend 1 to 2 hours in the kitchen. So try to kind of, you know, one meal at a time or one item at a time, whatever works for you. But a way of doing that would be like maybe, you're chopping veggies while your sweet potatoes are roasting in the oven, and you have your hard-boiled eggs on the stove kind of doing that. So I know that that's kind of takes a lot of multitasking, but I kind of put some pictures of how people could do food prep. Everyone can do it really different. But another way is doing like bigger meals, or, a chili, a lasagna, tacos, burritos, roasting or baking veggies and putting them in containers. Hard-boiled eggs can be an easy, healthy, on-the-go snack. If you'd like to make your own sauces and dips, you can make a hummus, or, you can buy those pre-made as well. The Instapot or Crock-Pot meals, those are super easy and helpful as well. So lots of resources for when we go over cooking funk, different options there, but that can be a meal, and if you make a large batch, you can even take that and freeze smaller portions for down the road when you don't have as much time the next time to make a meal. Pre-portioning easy breakfasts and snacks. So I feel like something a lot of our families talk about is like breakfast is hard, the kids are on the go, they have to leave 6 a.m. to get on the bus. So again, hard-boiled eggs, egg muffins, those are just little veggies or sweet potatoes, pour some egg in it in a muffin tin and bake it in the oven. Overnight oats, some oats with some milk, regular milk, non-dairy milk. You can add in nut seeds, nut butter, let that sit, and it kind of turns into an oatmeal. Pre-cutting fruits and veggies, energy bites or granola bars, and those can be as easy as like mashed banana, oats. Sometimes you can put sweet potato in there, some dried fruit and nuts, and put it in the oven. Yogurt, it can be easy, and sometimes you can do those drinkable yogurt smoothies or make smoothies, or trail mix, so like nut seeds, and then, some dried fruit, a few pieces of like, chocolate chips if they're like that, to go from there. Another thing that can help with time is the curbside delivery, or like the click list. So I know a lot of our families like using that. So at least you have your groceries, you go to pick them up, and you're not spending an hour at the store. The next slide related to time, I just had another few options. So purchasing cut up veggies. So cut up veggies are more costly, but it's still less than like going out to eat. So, some of those bigger stores like Costco, they have a huge bag of like broccoli. You could purchase that, roast some of it, use some of it to dip into like, a healthy ranch dip, stocking up on the frozen veggies for quick prep, which I mentioned. Doing simple things for dinner can also be helpful. So sandwiches, sandwich doesn't seem like a dinner food all the time. It's like lunch, but sandwich for dinner with some fruits and veggies on the side, that's super easy. Rotisserie chicken, that's something that I like to use a lot myself. You can use rotisserie chicken in anything. You can put it into a casserole, a soup, a salad, a sandwich, anything that like you were planning to use it for in a chicken recipe, you can replace with that. Purchasing pre-made burgers or like sausages from your grocery store butcher, and then just adding a side salad or roasted veggies. Making large batches of rice or quinoa and then freezing half of it for future use. Those are just another few kind of tips and tricks to save on time. And then our last one, Michelle, the cooking funk. So I think I have that as around slide 42 or so.
Alrighty, we're there.
Okay, perfect. So challenge, right? You're making the same thing all the time, and even you're getting tired of it. You don't have a lot of experience cooking maybe, so you're not sure what to make, how to make things. So our plan. So again, food prep and meal planning, we're kind of going back to that again, but brainstorm like some of your favorite meals and snacks. And this is also a great way to get kids involved too. Like, what do they want? Or, when you go out to eat, what do people like the most? Do we like tacos and burritos, or, what kinds of foods are we choosing most often? The recipe hunt. So there are so many websites, blogs, Pinterest, and then My Plate Kitchen, which is associated again with the My Plate website for meal ideas. So you can kind of get into a rabbit hole, honestly, on a lot of these things, but I think that that's a great place. You can even just search like healthy chicken recipes on some of these, and it'll come up with a million options. The cool thing about the My Plate Kitchen, which is associated with that My Plate app, is that you can filter by the nutrition focused food groups. So you can filter by, I want to do more fruits and veggies, or even a nutrient. So I want to reduce sodium, or cooking equipment that you have available, or cuisine. So I thought that was a really cool option that you can kind of filter all of those things to see what you would like. If you have access to a dietitian, please talk to them. We love getting recipe ideas and healthy meal ideas. So ask people for their advice or what they do, or if they have any things that a lot of families like. Community cooking classes. So I know here in our area, Columbus, we have something called Local Matters, and I think in Michigan they have like our Cooking Matters, but those are really cool options. We also have one, another option like through one of our other organizations in our community, but those are really cool options to just get different ideas. And sometimes they're free classes, or you just kind of pay by donation. So look into if those are options in your area. And then theme meals. So this can be fun, kind of like I was saying, asking for input, but like theme nights for dinner can make things easy. Even kind of dividing it into like, you know, breakfast for dinner, or like on Tuesdays we do like Taco Tuesdays, which means maybe one Tuesday we do tacos, maybe the next Tuesday we do kind of like some kind of taco soup, maybe another Tuesday we do like taco salad bowls, or meatless Mondays. So every Monday we're doing meatless Monday, which could be, again, like a kind of like a chickpea vegetable dish with some quinoa. You could do like a bean soup, or a bean chili, soup and salad, stir fry, Fiesta Friday, pizza party, like burger night. So just different ways to kind of think of the way that you can cook. All right, and then Michelle, if you want to go to the bottom, so meal and snack ideas. So we just wanted to give you some ideas based on everything we talked about. So I'm around slide 51. So we have a healthy eating toolbox for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. So quickly to just kind of brief over that. So savory options, you can do eggs. If we want to do eggs, there's hard-boiled, scrambled, egg wraps, quiches, frittatas, burritos, toast. That can change it up too. Avocado toast with an egg. You can do with it with like beans and salsa. You can do like smoked salmon on toast if that's something you like. A hash. Leftovers for breakfast. Breakfast does not have to be breakfast food, so it can literally be leftovers. If you like sweeter things, yogurt's a great option. Doing smoothies, peanut butter on toast, homemade granola bars, energy bites, overnight oats. Our next slide about lunch. So the bento boxes, you can do kind of like your own homemade Lunchable, deli and cheese wraps or roll-ups, cut up fruits and veggies, yogurt, a little bowl, which can kind of encompass like a Chipotle style or Mediterranean, Italian, soup and salad, a loaded potato or a sweet potato, lettuce wraps, leftovers, quesadillas. On to dinner. These are just highlighting some of the things I mentioned. So meatless Mondays, Taco Tuesdays, the Instapot, the slow cooker, on the grill, healthy pizza varieties. And then our sides and snacks. So we kind of divided this into fruits, veggies, dips and spreads, and sides. So pairing one of the fruits and veggies with like a dip spread and or side. So again, like that would be like apple and peanut butter, cucumbers and hummus, and adding a string cheese maybe, or bell peppers and some like homemade Greek yogurt with like ranch seasoning, and then like a hard-boiled egg on the side, or just something like that. So putting it all together onto our next slide. So my goal with this slide is really to just instill confidence. All of this can be so overwhelming, but just select a few things or one thing that you want to work on. So hopefully we gave everyone some ideas that can kind of start brainstorming, you know, options for your family. And the next slide, we just kind of summarize it. So reach out to your dietitian with questions if you have one. set aside some time to plan. I think that's important too, considering what sounds good this week, your shopping list, your food prep, setting meal times for the week. So, you know, based on schedules, and then, you know, you are, as the parent or guardian, you know, in control. So, you know, really kind of trying to get your family's input, because we want them to have buy-in, but give yourself a break too. Employ help from kids or significant others to really just, you know, there shouldn't be one person doing it all. Our next slide is just some resources that we wanted to mention. So that's kind of a list for us.
Yeah, these are all really great resources, websites, and they are hyperlinked, so these slides will be available. And you can click any of these, and they're a really great place to just find some nutrition-related resources. So information on, you know, medically related diet and lifestyle, if you're looking to read some articles on particular things, if you're looking for more information on my plate, or if you want to have some more information about particular vitamins or minerals or things like that. All of these are really great and incredible places to source some information. And then we have a ton of different recipe locations where you can find some really good recipes that are all broken up by all kinds of different diets, portion sizes, kid-friendly, all of that kind of stuff. So those are all available to use at your own discretion at home to kind of help put together some of the things that Kristen mentioned with maintaining a healthy diet. Thank you guys again so very much for having us here. We wanted to open it up here with the next few minutes that we have to allow anybody to ask any particular questions that they might have for us. I know we covered a lot of information today.
Yes, thank you so much, Kristen and Evelyn, for an amazing presentation. Some questions have already come in the chat, but if you have a question, there is a Q&A bubble on the bottom. If you want to click on it and type in your questions, we'll try to get as many questions as answered as possible. Are you guys familiar with GOLO, and is it a good eating program option?
I have never heard of that. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
I try to stay pretty up to date on some of those more like the programs and things like that, but I have never heard of that.
Yeah, GOLO, G-O-L-O. So we don't know. Let's not answer it if we don't know. Let's see. Is there a certain ratio of protein that a boy with DMD should aim for? And if you need their medical information, or you'd have to know them as a patient to answer, that's totally fine. But I don't know if there's like a one answer for all.
Yeah, so as I mentioned on that protein slide, unfortunately, it isn't really a one answer for all. So we really do individualize it based on their anthropometrics, so weight, height, and BMI. As you probably saw in the protein slide, like the guidelines for protein, that's a general guideline. So when we talk about grams per kilogram, that's referring to how many grams per kilogram of body weight. And the way you find kilograms of body weight is taking pounds divided by 2.2. But in the setting of any of our patients who are overweight or obese, we tend to kind of use we call it more, you know, a BMI that's closer to the 50th percentile to calculate their protein needs, because we don't want to do too much protein. So I know that's a really general answer, but protein is something that varies a lot within the population, so we can't really give a specific number, but hopefully that gives you some guidance.
I do also think that it has to do, again, with kind of their current medical status too, right? Like, what's going on with the patient? Are they losing weight? Are they non-ambulatory, so they're not up moving around, and maybe they're getting, you know, bed sores or some of those pressure wounds or something? Or, you know, is there a clinical or medical reason why we need to be doing more protein? So in this patient population, it's really hard to pinpoint one exact thing to being a blanket, you know, good for all type of situation.
Thank you. We had a question about receiving a personalized diet, and that's something you wouldn't want your own registered dietitian to help you with. And if you don't have one and you're looking for one either within the MDA Care Center or just one in your area, I do suggest that you reach out to our MDA Resource Center, and we'll add both the phone number and the email in the chat. And they can help you find a nutritionist in your area, whether they are a part of the MDA Care Center or not.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think getting to know somebody and having them get to know you is probably one of the most beneficial things to finding and developing a plan that's going to work for you long term.
There was a question about organic or non-GMO. Is there a better option? Or which one is a better option?
Yeah, I always like to put it, because we work with such a diverse patient population that comes from so many different socioeconomic backgrounds. And so my general kind of response to that is, if it's the difference between you eating a vegetable and not eating a vegetable, I would much rather you go ahead and eat the vegetable and just take some extra precautions if you feel as though a non-organic food item might be something that we might want to take extra steps to wash better, or all of those things. But again, yeah, if it's going to be the difference between you eating a fruit and a vegetable or not, and excluding those foods from your diet, I would much rather you just go ahead and get the non-organic or what have you option.
If people want more guidance on that too, the Environmental Working Group, every year they do a Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen list. And I think that can be a good place to start. So that just kind of means they kind of categorize it into, the dirty dozen are things that, I won't get into it actually, but you can refer to that. I think that's a really good starting place for that.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. A question came up about V8 juice ? I'm assuming is the attendee would like to know if this would be a good juice to be drinking.
Kind of depends on what variety. I know V8 Juice is putting out a lot of different varieties that are a little bit higher in added sugar, so I guess it kind of depends on what you're doing. Now, I will say, for some of our patients that absolutely are picky and will not eat any sort of fruit or vegetable, I mean, I'd much rather them get that than sit down and drink, a soda, or maybe some just plain old juice from concentrate or something like that. I mean, we're definitely going to get a little extra from a vitamin mineral perspective with a V8 juice than we are, again, a soda or some other type of beverage.
Absolutely. Are there any particular foods to eat to reduce inflammation, or foods that you shouldn't eat that will increase inflammation?
Well, I guess I kind of can go back to Kristen's part a little bit there and say that our fruits and our vegetables are going to be our best friends, especially in this patient population. They are so high in vitamins, minerals, and what we call phytonutrients, or nutrients that we can find within plant sources that are very, very helpful for reducing inflammation and amongst other things in our body. So making those food groups the foundation, I suppose, of your diet is probably one of the most beneficial things you can do. And then just avoiding some of those things, as Kristen mentioned, like the trans fats and saturated fats that maybe we're sourcing from foods that are, processed foods that are in general just not going to be great for us. And again, kind of focusing on the food groups that we know are going to benefit us in many different ways.
Absolutely, thank you. Do you have any advice for protein sources for vegetarians and how much they should consume? Is that different? Does that differ from someone who isn't a vegetarian?
Yeah, so vegetarian protein sources, so as far as amounts, again, individual, I don't think that vegetarians need to eat like a ton more protein than people who are eating meat. But our vegetarian protein sources that we're looking at, and I know, with different diet restrictions, sometimes this can be a little bit more restrictive, but our beans are a great option, beans and legumes, nuts, nut butters, and seeds, so, like your trail mixes and stuff like that. any kind of like dairy product that's like yogurt or cheese. And again, vegetarian, vegan, not sure, but eggs are a super, super good source as well. If people eat soy, tofu is a good option that can be added to the diet. Quinoa is also a great grain that also adds some protein to our diet. So there are a variety of sources out there. And again, I wouldn't really, depending on the situation, I wouldn't really say that they need more. But I think that all of those things in a variety would be really important in kind of completing that protein profile for a vegetarian.
And we have time for one more question. Let's talk a little bit about alcohol consumption. Are there any special issues that individuals with neuromuscular diseases should take into consideration with alcohol consumption?
Yeah, I mean, if we have a patient who, again, over the age of 21, is wanting to, you know, incorporate alcohol into their regimen, I would definitely encourage them to reach out to either their primary care doctor or their primary managing provider if they have one with relation to their neuromuscular condition, because the only thing, like one of the major things I suppose that I can think of that can potentially be a safety risk is medication interactions with alcohol. So that's a really big kind of caution there, is we want to make sure if you're taking any medications, there are a lot of flags there to say, hey, don't take that with this medication or whatever. Also, our body kind of, and this is maybe a little bit longer of a discussion, but in brief, alcohol, our body treats alcohol like a fat. So the more alcohol we're taking in, the more essentially fat our body thinks we're taking in. And so sometimes we can have some unintended weight gain from some of our alcoholic beverages. Also, I think a lot of the mixtures that we utilize with some of the alcoholic beverages can be pretty high in added sugar and whatever else that most of our most of our patients that are non-ambulatory likely wouldn't get much benefit from, and again, might provide more calories without little nutritive value.
Thank you so much for answering. I'm gonna ask one more quick question. Do smoked
Sure.
almonds count as an almond?
Do what almonds?
Smoked almonds?
I don't know. I've never heard. I don't know. Is that just like a toasted almond?
I would say, yeah, I would say that's,
Yeah,
I mean,
it kind of depends. Like, yeah, I would say any of those, even if you're doing flavored nuts, just being careful of the salt, if they're adding additional salt or anything like that, or,
right.
or sugar on top of them. But yeah, I mean, I would say sure.
Yes, I would count smoked almonds as an almond as well. And a comment came in from the chat saying alcohol can cause inflammation, which I think can happen for any individual.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go to our next slide. Thank you so much to our guest presenters today, Kristen and Evelyn. We sincerely appreciate your time, expertise, and everything you do for the neuromuscular disease community. So thank you very much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having us.
Yeah, we're happy to join.
We would love to hear your comments about this webinar. If you have a smartphone, open your camera and point it at the QR code on the screen. A webpage will pop up with a short survey on today's webinar. If you don't have a smartphone, once the webinar is over, a screen will pop up with the survey as well. If anyone has any questions about this webinar, please feel free to email them to mdaengage@mdausa.org, and we will follow back up with you. Visit mda.org/communityed to view our educational resources and upcoming virtual events. If you are new to MDA through this program and are diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease under MDA's umbrella, or are a loved one of someone who is diagnosed, we encourage you to stay engaged with MDA. You can do this by visiting mda.org/join and completing a short form. This will help you keep up to date on the latest information and education to help keep families informed in the neuromuscular community. Also, Kristen and Evelyn have shared their slides, so those will be available to people who tuned in today. This concludes today's MDA Engage webinar, Nutrition and Neuromuscular Disease. Thank you very much for attending and have a great rest of your day.